After 9:15, and I trust more people will trickle in. But let's begin. We won't begin so much with a prayer. We'll read Psalm 19. That'll be our introduction, so we'll read it responsively. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are sure and altogether righteous. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the comb. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So an introduction there, we're talking about some hard words of Jesus, and today we're talking about being shrewd. This may not be as big of a hard truth or something that's hard to decipher as other ones, but we'll look at it nonetheless. 2 Corinthians 4:2 says, "We have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God." So this is St. Paul talking. And what is he saying in your own words?
Just always be truthful, you know?
Yeah, we're not a bunch of snake oil salesmen. Right. We're not going from town to town and kind of tweaking it and saying, "Oh, wouldn't you like to get into contact with your deceased grandma," or something like that. Matthew 5:37 says, "Simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." Anyone know the context for that? Jesus is talking about what?
Swearing by the things on the altar or something like that?
Yeah, unnecessary swearing. So if I'm selling Rich a car, if I'm selling him an old Honda Civic, and I say, "Rich, I swear to you by the altar that this car is good, just so I can get some money for my," well, that's unnecessary, right? You don't need to do that. All of these word games, all of this kind of swearing, and it's unnecessary. So Jesus isn't saying, if you say absolutely yes, that's a sin. He's not saying that, right? But he is saying, if you're gonna just take something mundane and use God's name and say, "God, punish me if I'm not telling the truth." If you're gonna do that, that's unnecessary. Now you're cheapening God's name by doing that. Maybe I should talk about the concept of an oath. Anyone understand the concept of swearing or the concept of an oath? Why God is invoked in swearing or an oath? Or why we have a Bible in court? Anyone understand that? In the Old Testament, they would have an oath formula. If I don't do this, may X or whatever happen. In other words, what you're saying is, you're not just saying, "I promise." What you're saying is, if I'm not telling the truth, may God punish me, right? You're invoking God as your witness, right? God is my witness, and God also is the person to punish you if you're not upholding it, right? That's really what you're saying with an oath or when you swear. Questions on that? Does that make sense? Anything beyond this is from the evil one. The devil likes to twist words around, always has. 2 Corinthians 1:12, it says, "Now this is our boast, our conscience testifies that we have conducted ourselves in the world, and especially in our relations with you, in the holiness and sincerity that are from God. We have done so not according to worldly wisdom, but according to God's grace." And then Colossians 3 says, "Do not lie to each other, but since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge and in the image of its creator." Explain the general impression these passages give about the way God calls Christians to live and conduct themselves. So put it in your own words. What are these words telling you to do? Welcome into the sauna.
It's just basically always deal forthright and honestly with each other and without ulterior motives and
Yeah.
be up front.
Excellent. Other ways that you might put it might give us a good start. Bruce?
Maybe by God's grace we live holy lives, maybe not even the way the world sees it, but in the way that God sees it.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't Doesn't just matter what people see, right? Matters what God sees. You think of what they say in court, right? The truth, the whole truth. How many times have you gotten less than the whole truth? You ever gotten that?
Not every day.
Yeah, right? Well, no, it was true, right? But it wasn't the whole truth, right? Or nothing but the truth. There's the truth, but there's also a lot of bluster. There's a lot of, kind of distractions in how they talk. There's some, we're not always used to this, right? It can be very easy for anyone to struggle with honesty, right? To leave out parts of the truth, but we said it was true, right? Or to give all sorts of different qualifications to stay silent when we should speak up. So, studying God's Word. It says Christians are to be characterized by truth. We don't follow opinions or the changing tides of society, but the truth of God's Word, and we're to live by the truth as we speak plainly and honestly. Deceit doesn't have a place in a Christian's words or actions. So then, does Jesus mean what? So what then does Jesus mean when he calls us to be shrewd as snakes? Matthew 10:16 says, "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves." If you want to, you can pick up a Bible and look for that. That's in Matthew chapter 10. If you'd like to get the wider context for that. But thoughts on what it might mean to be shrewd?
Be aware of your surroundings. Yeah.
Be aware, right? Be aware of your surroundings. What else?
And think about what you're hearing.
Yeah.
People are snowballing you or whatever. Think about that and see if it's really makes sense.
Yeah, Bruce.
Beware the world doesn't behave and think the way we do, so we have to
Mhm.
respect certain things.
Don't be gullible. Don't be naive.
Yeah.
What else?
Don't be fooled by the devil.
Don't be fooled by the devil. Mike, would you mind reading the next two verses, or let's make it three verses, I guess, after
17
that
and
verse.
18 then?
Yeah, 17 and 18.
All right. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles.
Thank you. Yeah, so, right, well, what is Jesus talking about here? He's saying, look, the world is going to be a dangerous place, so don't be naive, don't be gullible about it. You look in church history, and it can be very easy for us to think, well, everybody, we're all just good and rosy, but then you look in history and you see, okay, well, there's a lot of people that, there's a lot of dangers for Christians, right? Spiritual and otherwise, governmental, earthly, all that. Anything else you'd add? Be shrewd as snakes. Next question. Why might Christians struggle with those words? Be shrewd?
It seems like you're kind of sneaky, especially when you're referencing it to a snake.
Yeah. It looks like you're kind of hiding something. Yeah, and especially snake, right? Where else do you see snakes in the Bible?
Yeah.
Garden of Eden, right? I'm not positive on this, but I'd like to do some research. If you look at medieval pictures, it wasn't until late medieval that dragons had 4 legs, and before that they had 2. And I wonder if the idea of a dragon in Revelation is really just a snake. Same kind of deal, reptile.
They used to call them in mythology worms too. So
Yeah.
It might be snakes, worms.
That's kind of the idea that, this is how the devil is characterized, right? You don't meet a whole lot of good snakes in the Bible. I guess you have the bronze snake, but that's maybe a... Other thoughts? Why might Christians struggle with this? Linda, maybe you said something I didn't quite catch it.
That was a while ago.
The ship has sailed. Other thoughts on this?
You may have felt comfortable because it sounds like, almost sounds like being sneaky or something, which a snake is sneaky.
Yeah.
Slithering around.
Yeah.
That makes it just put some connotations that maybe you have to think about.
Yeah, or you think of snakes and they're often harmful. I mean, maybe not always poisonous, but...
Like there was a
yeah.
picture Linda showed me yesterday on his phone or Sun City page or something, where somebody in their back porch was going to sit down, but they picked up, the cushion looked a little lumpy. They picked up and there was a copperhead underneath there. So that's what they're talking about, being sneaky.
Yeah.
Be aware.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you do confront a snake, though, they don't just always strike out. They'll sit there and look at you and
Yeah.
taste the air and figure it out, and they decide, well, do I want to deal with this or not?
Yeah, they're, I
Devious.
suppose in another sense.
A lot of times they run away too, so
Yeah.
that means,
Yeah,
you know,
most of the time
avoiding
they do.
obvious dangers.
Yeah, right, judicious. Yeah, how do you react to these things? Good. So then 3, look at the following examples. How do you see shrewdness displayed in each? So 1 Kings 3:16 and the verses that follow. If we could have someone look that one up, 1 Kings 3, that'll be the only one you really have to look at, I think.
3?
1 Kings 3.
It's a very cool story, by the way.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Yeah, so 16 and then following. Could I have someone read that?
All the way to the end? Is that-
All the way
is that what that means,
to
or-
all the way to the end of 28, yeah, to the end of the chapter.
Okay. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born." The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours." But the first one insisted, "No, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine." And so they argued before the king. The king said, "This one says, 'My son is alive, and your son is dead,' while that one says, 'No, your son is dead, and mine is alive.' Then the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, 'Cut the living child in 2, and give half to one and half to the other.' The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son, and said to the king, 'Please, my lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him.' But the other said, 'Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave his ruling, 'Give the living baby to the first woman, do not kill him, she is his mother.' When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice."
Thank you. Yeah, so cool story, right? Thoughts on that? Reactions, comments to that question?
The emotion there, just the power of it, especially from the mother of the baby.
Sometimes there are kind of those stories in the Bible that make us a little bit uncomfortable, or kind of the midwives lying to Pharaoh about throwing the Hebrew boys in the river. Kind of makes us a little bit uncomfortable, but I think they're probably living more by the letter of, or the spirit of the law, rather than the letter of it. Let's go to the next one, Luke 24, 15, 16, and 18. So this is the context of the road to Emmaus, right? So Jesus has risen, and now he is on his way to a little town called Emmaus. He's going to appear but not reveal himself to a couple of disciples. And these are not necessarily part of the 12. It says, "As the 2 disciples on the way to Emmaus talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going farther." And then you know what happens after that. They say, "Well, come on in, Jesus, let's talk." And then he comes on in with them. Thoughts on that one? This is when they don't recognize him, but he's risen. He explains all of this, explains all of the Old Testament leading up to this. Thoughts? He doesn't reveal himself to them and say, "Hey, I'm Jesus. This is what happened." Any thoughts why Jesus wouldn't reveal himself right away?
Wasn't Jesus listening to what they were talking about?
Hmm?
Trying to find out if they're talking about it. I guess,
You gotta hear
trying
their
to figure
honest
out what
reaction.
everybody was thinking after he died.
Sure, right? He gets their honest reaction. What else? Other thoughts?
I think he's waiting for food for a conversation. He already knows what they're thinking.
Sure.
He's gonna let them say it.
Sure.
And then he can come back with some kind of a rebuttal.
Yeah.
Just let them know how it really is.
Yeah. Kind of lets them lay it all out, and then eventually he kind of talks to them, and they say, weren't our hearts burning within us? I kind of wonder this too. I didn't have a whole lot of time to study it. I kind of wonder if Jesus isn't, now he's going to transition to, he won't be visible, right? He's going to ascend soon enough. So maybe now he wants people to understand who he is based off of his words and not just, all right, I'm here, you can see me. But now it's going to transition to faith comes by hearing more and more, right? Thomas, you believe because you've seen, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And then also there's kind of this really cool aspect to it. Jesus will kind of reveal himself to Mary again, and when is that? It's when he says her name, right? Mary, and she says, Rabboni, my teacher. And there's almost kind of this, really cool element to just when Jesus gives them this beautiful surprise. I don't know if you buy it, and we can extend to each other the right hand of fellowship if we're not on the same page. But there is something intriguing about Jesus being revealed at this special meal they have. Whether you see that as an allusion to, or kind of a talking about the Lord's Supper or not, I don't know. Some people would say yes, some people would say no. But wouldn't it be kind of cool if people saw Jesus and they saw him in the Lord's Supper? That might be a cool thing, but again, I don't want to press that too hard. Thoughts on that? Because again, when does Jesus disappear? When do they recognize him? They say, it's Jesus, right? As he breaks the bread at their meal. So, yeah, I don't want to press that too hard, but could have interesting ramifications.
Always big things happen though during meals. A lot of revelations and a lot of stuff, so.
Certainly. At Mount Sinai, right, the elders, they all eat with God, right? And that's kind of how they are communing with him all throughout it. I mean, you could probably write a whole series of books on food in the Bible, right? You have the fruit in the Garden of Eden. You have manna and quail, right? You have the Lord's Supper. You have, even in Luke's Gospel, there's a whole kind of motif of who does Jesus eat with and what does that say about the people he's eating with, right? Eating back then was like going golfing with someone. If you go golfing with a mob boss in Chicago, what does that say about you? So Jesus he's eating with tax collectors, prostitutes, all this. He's really elevating their social status by doing something like that. You could write books and books on food in the Bible. Thoughts on this? Otherwise, moving on. Proverbs 9:8, it says, do not rebuke a mocker, he will hate you. Rebuke a wise man, he will love you. Yeah, how do you explain that? Or there's another couple of verses in Proverbs where it talks about answer a fool according to his folly, or don't answer a fool. How do you explain that distinction? I think we talked about it in a couple of Bible studies ago, but
A wise man always knows he doesn't have all the answers, and if he can be rebuked, he'll examine what he said. A mocker already
Right.
thinks he knows everything, and he's going to be angry because
yeah.
you know.
There's a number of different words for fool in Proverbs, and this is one of the most interesting studies I kind of did in seminary. But there's one kind of fool that you can't tell him anything because he already knows everything. That's one kind of fool. There's another kind of fool who's just kind of a simpleton, isn't really wise to the ways of the world. There's another kind of fool that's more like a brute, gives full vent to his anger, never holds anything back. Another kind of fool is just inexperienced, just kind of naive, green, kind of wet behind the ears. So all different kinds of senses. But yeah, one of those is, you can't tell me anything. I already know it all. God would say, that person is a fool. Number 4, it says being shrewd, crafty even. I guess it depends. The Greek word there is phronimos, or kind of wise, prudent, sensible. Now we're kind of getting into splitting hairs and talking about words, but it's not out of place for the Christian. However, what reminder does Jesus give us as he calls us to live this way? It says, shrewd as snakes, but what's the other part of it?
Innocent as doves.
What does that mean? Innocent as doves.
We have to have holy lives, and the world should see that holiness. So if we're going to be shrewd, we don't want to come across looking like we're crooks. We still have to show that the innocence, the holiness.
Sure. if I were to ask someone, what does a dove mean to you, biblically, what do you suppose they would say? What kind of
Peace.
Yeah, peace, right? Peaceable.
Were they also
Non-violent.
sacrificial animals too?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, some of the birds that you could sacrifice, right? So you remember, was it 2 turtle doves that because Mary and Joseph were poor? Yeah, that's what they would sacrifice for Jesus.
Yeah.
All right. Agree or disagree on why all deception is sinful? What do you think?
I'd say no,
No, and why?
because it's another way of being crafty if you know, there, I would say it's not absolute, but, it's a,
What would be an example you might give? Us?
I think if you were at war, like for example the Ukrainians and the Russians, if you were being a bit deceitful with the Russians in your town about the whereabouts of some of the soldiers,
Yeah.
that might be okay. Maybe that's a stretch. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the classic, a Nazi comes to your door and asks if you're hiding anyone that they would take to a concentration camp, any Jews.
yeah, and Frank, I mean,
Yeah, right,
deception
right.
deception there.
Or probably the closest example is, you have the story of Rahab and the spies, and God blesses her for that, right? Or you have the midwives and Pharaoh, right? How do you deal with that? Other thoughts on that? I'll give my thoughts in a little bit, but
Is deception active though? I mean, is that lying? Or is just not telling something?
I don't know.
That's
Yeah.
deception also, but that's not an active lie.
Yeah. Is there a material difference between the two?
That's- yeah.
That's kind of because I'm not sure if there's a if I stay silent, is that I think in general in church history people have said, well, sins of omission, when you don't do something that you should, they're not as bad. I don't know if you could really justify that.
Little sins.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a little one. Yeah,
It's a
Bruce.
little
It reminds me of Abraham when he lied about his wife being his sister.
Right.
And when he confronts, he said, "Well, she really is my sister, not the daughter of my father, but the daughter of my mother." So
Yeah,
it was a half truth,
And what does God do there? Pharaoh gets some kind of illness, and then it wasn't seen as a great act of faith in that context, right? Yeah, so that's interesting. Other thoughts on this, other takes that you would have. I'll give you mine, but
Yeah, the deception though, in the Bible, there's several stories which I can't pinpoint at the moment, but I've heard them where, the soldiers are coming to the doors looking for people or whatever.
Yeah.
And the Christians are there. Whoa, we are just God-loving people and we're having our supper right now, would you care to join us? They weren't saying anything about, no, we're hiding everybody and underneath the house. We're just not telling you the truth, really.
Paul's escape from Jerusalem.
Just kind of like not saying it.
I've got an
Bruce.
example that kind of always baffled me. I think it's in Revelations where God says, "Who's going to go and put a deceiving spirit in these people, or send lying spirits, or something like that?" You know which one I'm talking about? It's in Revelation.
Yeah, it's there's one in 1st or 2nd Kings where there's the prophet Micaiah, who is there's a whole thing where it's kind of you almost get this idea that there's like a council of people in heaven, and God says, who should I send to deceive Ahab and bring him disaster?
Maybe that's in Revelation.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, then you get into all that deal. God's not going to deceive him, but he'll let someone else deceive him. I guess here's kind of where I fall and react to this. Let me know what you think. But I would say follow the spirit of the law, but then ask the Lord for forgiveness. Don't go against conscience is generally a safer way to go, but then also rather than saying God's law is just kind of mush, and I can, if I feel I have a good reason, then I can ignore this part, or we can just dismiss this. Maybe, love your neighbor and love God. Do as you will, and then ask God for forgiveness afterwards, maybe. That's maybe how I would take it. Because otherwise you can very easily get into a kind of a spot of, well, I don't really think the government should take all this taxes because look what they're doing, therefore I can rationalize fudging some numbers on TurboTax. You know, it can very easily kind of descend into kind of a relativism. Well, maybe I shouldn't. What is really deception? What is all of this? Does that make sense? Thoughts on that? Reactions to that?
Well, for me, I guess the bottom line question is it justifiable lie to protect somebody's life? For example, if the Nazis were knocking at your door and you were hiding people, you know, would that be justifiable? To me, I would think, I don't think you could tell the truth and let them take and kill people. You're protecting people's lives.
Yeah.
I don't know how that could be wrong, but you still are lying, so I don't know. It's pretty confusing.
Yeah, I maybe there it's helpful to talk about when Jesus summarizes the law. He says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And what's the best way to love God and neighbor in that context? I would say, and I think the best way to love God and neighbor would be to protect human life. I think that's kind of what undergirds it. But yeah, at the same time, there may be fuzzier areas of that, right? So let's say a nation is on the path that way, but they're not all the way there, right? And it's something minor. I don't know, throw in something about vaccines. Do you say it? You know, you could go anywhere on the scale, the spectrum of it, you know.
I'll give you another example. There was a woman in the Bible in the Old Testament that there was some general running from the war, and he was trying to get away, and she said, "Come into my tent, come into my tent," and she laid down, or he laid down and went to sleep.
Right.
And after giving him some milk, whatever, and then she took a tent peg, and while he was laying asleep, and drove a peg through his head, and they sang songs about her being a hero, but she deceived him.
Jael and Sisera, yeah.
It's another interesting example of deception, and either Harold is a hero with them.
Yeah, right. And there are times where kind of God blesses it or kind of sanctions it as they did it. There might be other times where you would say, well, ends didn't always justify the means, right? Abraham and Hagar, right? Well, I'm doing this to keep alive the promise of a son, right? I'm doing this to keep this whole descendant and seed of the offspring deal alive, right? I'm doing this to do that. Or the other thing too is you look in the New Testament, and a lot of times the apostles, they would just be forthright about it. They were willing to suffer for their faith. So maybe that's another element is, am I lying to get out from bearing the cross that God assigns us in life? That would be another thing too, because Paul doesn't say, no, I wasn't preaching that. I wasn't talking about Jesus. I was talking about Shmeezus or something like that. He doesn't say that, right? He says, no, yeah, fine, I'll take it. Punish me, right? Yeah, they don't necessarily always turn themselves in, right? Paul will escape, but I don't know. Thoughts on that? Other thoughts on that? Patty?
So is deception kind of like when Joseph didn't tell his brothers who he really was, or is just that putting off the truth?
Yeah, you tell me. And then also tell me, was that right, or was that Joseph getting back at his brothers?
I mean, he could have told them right away, but he didn't. He kept playing this game with them.
Maybe I read the story of Joseph wrong, but do you kind of get the sense that he kind of really puts him through the ringer?
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I'm going to put this little silver cup in his sack, and, oh, Simeon, I guess you got to stay behind. Oh, no, what are you going to tell your dad? You know, and it, a lot of times we think, oh, Joseph, yeah, amazing. But, yeah, and of course, later he forgives his brothers, but at first, there's kind of this, yeah, have you changed yet? He's not really as Christ-like as we might like him to be. I don't know.
To me, that's like the biggest deception I know in the Bible. Just that,
that's a huge one.
He could have came out and told him right away who he was, and not played all those games with them.
Yeah, but it would have been a much boring story.
Well, doesn't he send them back to his father and back and back, you know, and that's not easy travel either.
Yeah, get Benjamin, right, yeah.
Like,
and this is extreme crisis, there's poverty, there's famine, you know. That's an ugly story. I mean, if you want to hear one about family abuse and the toll that takes on people, they wanted to kill him, right?
They sold him, yeah.
Yeah.
They
Then they lied to their father, and their father wasn't all that great to begin with. I had the luxury of not having a mom or dad who played favorites, but not everybody has that, and that's, Yeah, that can cause a lot of destruction. The patriarch, married to two different women, and then he has his favorite set of the kids. Yeah, that was trouble. Other
just
thoughts?
having the favorite wife though probably didn't
Yeah.
help the situation.
Speaking of that, I'll address something right now. So, in the sermon, we'll talk about whoever does not hate his brother, sister, father, mother. Take note of in the Old Testament how that word hate is used. So it'll talk about how Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and so he hated Leah. Does that mean he had like angry eyebrows and always had his fist clenched when he was looking at her? No, it means he treated her less preferentially. He favored. He had prioritized Rachel. Same thing with Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated, right? Doesn't mean that you're always kind of scowling and you're just filled with this sense of antagonism or disgust at someone, but it's more of a preferential treatment. So when Jesus says that, if you don't hate your father, he's not saying, I want you to listen to whatever kind of punk rock music from the 90s and literally hate your family. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying instead, you need to treat me more preferentially in your lives. You need to put me ahead in the way that you make decisions and act and all these things. It's kind of a Hebrew exaggeration, you might say. Does that make sense?
Words hate translate the same way into English?
I don't know. Some people try to get it.
There's
Yeah.
a few words in English that don't mean the same.
Hate is okay. Some people might say renounce or despise. Hate's fine. I think the bigger thing is more cultural. So we assume we tend to associate love and hate with an emotional feeling and an affect. They would, and I think in Greek and in the Bible really associates it more with an action, right? So when it says God loved the world, does that mean he looked at people like Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot or even any of us and said, oh, I'm just filled with warm fuzzies because of how they make me feel? It means that he acted out of our best interest. He not only, it wasn't so much that he felt warm fuzzies, but that he did what was best for us, right? Love is characterized more by action than butterflies, like we talk about in our 21st century American context. Same thing with hate, right? It's not so much a state of mind or an emotion, it's more of action, right? Put your family second, put me first, that's what Jesus says. Does that make sense? Clarifications,
Why
questions?
don't they translate it that way then, so it does make better sense?
That's the question, right? How much do you interpret the Old Testament? Because you could do it all the way, and you could be the Message translation, where it says Jesus ate a sandwich with his disciples, or you could go all the way on the other hand and have it be very literal, right? His nose was hot for him in Hebrew. He was angry. Where do you fall on that spectrum? Is kind of that's the conversation.
Yeah.
Push back on that. Questions, thoughts? To say the least, it's forceful how Jesus talks about hating father and mother. Matthew kind of he maybe includes more words. He talks about loving them more than these. So, loving him more than these. All right. We talked about all those. Talked about deception. List some circumstances from your own experience where the church or individual Christians have to be particularly shrewd.
I'd say in business. I think it's important that we're really charged with, being good stewards of everything God's given us, because basically all our money has been given to us by God.
Sure.
And so in that regard, these good stewards, for instance, in dealing with the church, we deal with the outside world, so it's important not to make a bad deal like for a building or for rent, because it's God's money. And so I think that's a good example.
Yeah, we don't just assume that everybody's all heart and they're only after our best interests.
You need to negotiate a good deal and not just roll over and say, okay, we'll do that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Other instances where you may need to be shrewd.
Civics, government, how much to be involved, when not to be involved, who to vote for, who as an individual or as a church, what positions do you take? I mean, how vocal can you be about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to align yourself with a government that's anti-God. you know, and I mean, where's the pro-God government, you know, I mean, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, what do you do?
Yeah, you never want to hitch your horses too quickly to any one in particular, because if you do, then that guy, well, did you know what that guy did? And now you're, you know, so it's a mess. But yeah, at the same, I mean, okay, elephant in the room is COVID, right? We have to be, you know, shrewd as a church. What are the limits? What are we going to say? All of this. I don't know, handle it with humility, but also shrewdness. We understand that people are sinful, right? And different people have agendas. That doesn't mean we're endlessly cynical, right? Still talks about honoring the emperor in Peter's epistles. That could be an endless rabbit hole that we go down. But certainly we have to be shrewd, right? We have to understand human nature. We have to understand these things. We also have to understand God's commands to worship and all that.
It's like you support it enough to maintain the orderly structure, government structure, but you don't
Right.
like, be aware that you're dealing with ungodly people at the same time. As
Yeah.
a church and as an individual, you have to look, I think that's the best way.
Keep your eyes wide open when you're dealing with all of this, right?
You know,
Yeah, you could be too cynical, and we could, you know, buy a commune in the middle of nowhere, and whatever. we could do all that, I guess. And
That's what I'm
Sounds
talking
pretty
about.
good right now, though.
you're getting us used to it with the,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm just planting the seeds right now.
All right, yeah.
October, there's a meeting. We're all going to talk about the Ozarks, and we're gonna, yeah.
non-air conditioned living.
That's
Out
right.
of the
Yeah, yeah,
country.
yeah. Well, Oriental countries, they would say that this air conditioning is bad for you. So it's resetting the yin and yang in your body by
Okay.
not having AC. So
It's the feng shui of our church.
a little bit of Eastern medicine this morning for Bible study. Other instances where you may need to be shrewd.
I
Bruce?
think-
One that comes to my mind is when a business has the symbol of a fish on their advertising.
Sure.
That kind of raises a red flag to me right away. And
Sure.
it probably shouldn't, but just because somebody pretends to be, or claims to be, I should say, a Christian, doesn't mean when I go to deal with them that money's not gonna be the one that's talking, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's just like, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to think
Yeah.
that they're gonna be in my best interest, but I just, yeah, that raises a flag for me immediately.
They had a study of different like people in their rooms, and they said that the reason that something is in a room is it's from one of three reasons. Like if you're decorating your own room, one, it's because you like to look at it or you like how it affects you. So you have a brown sugar and vanilla candle in your room. Maybe you like it. Maybe it's just there, just kind of incidentally. There's some clothes laying on the floor. You don't like it. You're not trying to impress anybody, but that's just how things go. And then third is maybe if you're trying to impress someone, right? I'm going to hang this diploma just like that. I'm going to put my blue ribbons right there. And sometimes you kind of wonder, you know, why is that fish there? Is it for their own purpose? They love the logo. They love the fish. Is it just there that they just had it there? Is it a little bit of marketing? Maybe make a little bit of money off of their tenuous connection to a church? And again, you don't want to be too cynical, but yeah. Jody, you had something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, you know, I know for me, like, going to work or with friends, it's so easy to be, like, swayed in the fleshly world, and
Yeah.
so you kind of have to be shrewd, like, where is this gonna lead me?
Yeah.
And, you know, you have to kind of be really aware and
Yeah. Someone put it this way. It's kind of like being a boat in water. Boats are supposed to be in the water, like Christians are supposed to be in the world. But if you get water in the boat, that's not good, right? So if you get too much worldliness in a Christian, that's not good, right? In the world, but not of it. Yeah, and that's always a hard, you know, at how many times do they, you know, tell a coarse joke or take the name of Jesus before I say, can we tone it down, guys? You know, and I don't know. You also go to Matthew 7, don't throw your pearls before swine, you know, is this time, you know, if they're, you know, rolling into work and they're a little bit buzzed still from the night before, is now the time to have that conversation, or am I taking these sacred things and throwing them to dogs? Yeah, incredible. That's a tough tough situation. Or maybe another one is just, this may be more kind of in my line of work. One of the toughest things is to know when people need law and when they need gospel, right? Do you always take people at their word? 9.5 times out of 10, just about always take people at their word, but maybe sometimes if you really know someone, if you've known them for decades, maybe if they're coming back, yeah, I'm sorry for doing that, yeah, but Jesus forgives me. Maybe at that point you need to be a little bit shrewd and give them law, you know. Other thoughts on this? Shrewdness? Otherwise, let's go to Luke 16, 1-9. This is one of the more challenging parables that we come across, but I like it. I've learned to love this parable. I'll read this one for us. Luke 16, 1-9. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes.' So he called in each one of his master's debtor. He said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 900 gallons of olive oil,' he replied." So that must have been somewhat of a currency. We wouldn't pay with olive oil nowadays, right? You don't take that and put it in the offering plate. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, 'And how much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he replied. He told him, 'Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." Thoughts on that? Questions, comments?
Yeah, translation.
Bruce?
Seems a bit deceptive to me.
Yeah.
He's commending him, but at the same time, I get how God wants us to use our money to help people. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But to help cheat somebody that you owe money to, I don't know, I got a little problem with that.
That's the rub, right? That's the tension in the text is Jesus telling us to do some kind of unauthorized transactions where we're losing our boss money, right? I think there we would say this is kind of an argument from lesser to greater. If this person is shrewd, if they know how to deal with money, shouldn't you guys also know how to deal with money? Shouldn't you Christians, shouldn't you believers also know how to deal with money? If they can do this, leverage money into something that's far more precious, for him it was making friends. For us, I mean, this is leveraging money into eternal gains, right? Shouldn't we be better than the shrewd manager? Does that kind of make sense? It's not so much saying, the point of this is that you need to cheat your boss. The point is more, if he can be shrewd, if he can be clever, if he can think about how to use and make his money work for him, then how much more shouldn't we, Because how much more is at stake for us who have eternity on our minds? Does that kind of make sense, that interpretation of the parable?
Yeah, you gotta believe that Jesus isn't trying to tell us to cheat anybody.
Right. And I think so why did Jesus tell it this way, do you suppose? Why did Jesus specifically have it where an evil guy is in the picture? Couldn't he have just told the story about someone who was responsible with his money? Why do you suppose he does it this way? Any thoughts? That's always one of the questions that is good to ask, is why say it this way? Why tell it in the form of a story or a parable or a riddle or a proverb?
Get our attention.
Right? Yeah, you can't really avoid that. Certainly it gets our attention, right?
Thank you.
Other ideas? Other thoughts on
He's making a contrast there between the people of the world and us.
it? Yeah.
So maybe that's why he did it. I really don't know.
Yeah, because the master commends the dishonest manager. Because if
Yeah.
the master, he knows that I'm reading that he knows he's reduced the bills of these people
Yeah.
to get them to pay. Otherwise, there would be no payment at all. So he's kicking the dishonest manager is getting money out of these people, and the master is like, good job, you were shrewd with these people,
Right, right.
you know?
Yeah.
So I don't think the master is really being cheated. I think the master's happy to get his money flowing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think it completely alleviates the tension because
Yeah.
what does he say? Go take your bill quickly, right?
Yeah.
Quick! Put it through the banks, don't let him catch it.
Right. Well, yeah, it's dishonesty, but I think that both the master and the manager are, you know.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
It ends up good. Yeah, yeah.
so that's a contrast with how we're supposed to treat people and act with people. I
Right.
think that's why he said why the villain is the
Yeah.
bad guy is the main focus of the parable.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
See what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Other thoughts on this? Otherwise, let's jump to those questions. It says, summarize Jesus' parable. In what way does he call us to be like the shrewd manager? Or what
Well,
isn't the point of the comparison? Mike?
Well, I was going to say that's kind of what we were just saying.
Yeah.
He manipulated the situation to get people to behave a certain way. I don't know if we're called to manipulate, but we're called to be our manipulation would be our honesty. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Our
yeah, yeah,
honesty
yeah.
would force people to
That-
behave or react.
That's kind of why I like the word leverage, where
Yeah.
it's kind of, I'm using this thing right here, I'm using money as a tool so that I can, I don't know, what do you make of that other line? Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. Is that what, countless cartoons have told us doesn't work, right?
It
You
sounds
can't buy
like
friends, yeah.
buying friends, but I think it's more like he's saying, work with these people and they'll
Yeah.
work with you, kind of. But it's a dishonest example
Yeah.
that he used, so it has to be a comparison and contrast.
Yeah, yeah.
It's weird because it's like it's not really spelled out, and it's like it's a difficult one to grasp.
It is,
It
yeah.
is. Because basically, he was losing his job, he wanted to do something, so at least I have people to go to, so I'm gonna do
Right.
this. That actually benefited the boss by getting some money. So to me, I'm gonna have to work on this program to totally get it. Because he was commended
Yeah.
by the dishonest manager to keep, and I guess he kept his job.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is what kind of commendation is it? Is it, you sly dog, but you're still fired? Or is it, yeah, you did good. The other thing too is, the reason, his motive for doing this isn't necessarily because these people simply can't pay. His reason for doing it is, now they're gonna like me and they're gonna invite me in. So I don't know, there's a number of, we don't want to alleviate too much the difficulties of it, but so maybe it's easier for us to short circuit it and say, let's go to what does this look like in the life of a believer? Well, how would you imagine applying this parable to your life or to our collective life as a church? Use money to gain friends for yourself so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. What might that look like for us as a church, Bruce?
I think it's like don't let money rule your life, but use it wisely, and you're not taking it with you anyway. So spend it wisely, use it shrewdly,
Yeah.
and honor me with it, because you're not taking it with you, and then you'll be blessed for it in the second one.
Right.
Yeah.
He
yeah.
knocked down the debt of these people, and then they were willing to work with him. I think
Yeah.
that's a little bit like, don't be a stickler. You owe me this much. You have to pay. But in various situations, you can work with people, but it's still an evil example. It's weird. It's funny how that
Yeah.
works, you know?
And this happens sometimes, right? So Luke 18, there's the parable of the unjust judge and the widow who wants to get some kind of justice. Now, is that saying that God is an unjust judge? No, but it's an argument from greater to lesser. If this is how this situation turns out, then how much more in a Christian situation, kind of?
Mhm.
Might that look like hospitality? Might that look like us saying, you know what? There's going to be a day where maybe the American dollar is going to inflate, so maybe what I want to do is we want to pour more into a hospitality budget for the church, and we'll welcome people. This is what we do all the time, right? Trunk or treat, right? We're going to give out candy, and then people will say, hey, I didn't know you had a church, or something like that, right? Or I'll have someone over, right? And here's the other thing. It's hard to have a friendship if money is off the table, right? If I'm going to say, I want to be your friend, but don't you ask me for a cent of my money. Well, that doesn't really work, does it? But if I have someone over and we have wine and we have steak and all that, might that slowly make a friend? Yeah, okay. And might it take money to reach out to people? I don't know. I'm kind of okay with that, understanding that as God's people, we want to use, because there's going to be a day where we can't use that money, right? When you're in the morgue, doesn't matter how much you have in your account, use it right now, and then use it for eternal purposes rather than letting it just inflate and lose money in your savings account. Does that make sense? What do you think of that? Pushback, questions, comments on that? Yeah, so you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings, right? So you're going to get people in heaven that are, yeah, come on, yeah, I remember that time when. That's a much better use than just kind of fattening a 401k. There's some translation difficulties in verse 9. This seems to be the best way to translate Jesus' words. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself so that when it is gone, they will welcome you into eternal dwellings. What then is Jesus' point? What do you suppose Jesus' point is? They will welcome you into eternal dwellings. Does this mean that if you're hospitable enough, you don't need Jesus and you're just going to earn heaven? Obviously not, Bruce.
I just think it means for those people that you've helped in this world, be it spiritually, physically, if they die and go to heaven before you, when you enter heaven, they're going to be there saying, you made a difference in my life, and I'm just very happy and I'm thankful you were here.
Yeah, you took a couple of greenbacks that were sooner or later going to lose their money, or their worth, right? You think of the Deutschmark, you think of any number of inflated currencies, and there was a window in your life where you traded that before it went to nothing, and that dollar didn't just make a difference for one generation or two or three, but for eternity, right? List some ways you could put this shrewdness into practice. How'd you put that into practice? What might that look like?
Million ways you put that in practice.
Yeah, right. All sorts of ways. Any number of events. Ministry takes money, right? Whether it's just feeding the people that do ministry, whether it's clothes, whether it's shelter, whether it's ongoing education, whether it's any number of things. Ministry takes money. Yeah.
And when you give to the Synod mission funds, and they have missionaries all over the world, and your monies are helping to bring people to Christ, and you don't know these people, but you're going to know them later on.
Yeah.
You're going to see them in heaven.
Yeah. This isn't something where you wrote the check and you say, bye, never going to see that again. The Lord says this could have drastic impact for years and years and years in eternity to come. Any last questions on this? It's a tough parable. Keep struggling with it. But some of the best lessons can be taught from the people that, or the most interesting lessons, maybe you might also say, can be taught from unlikely contexts, right? Let's go to the next one. We won't go through that worship part, but we'll do the introduction. We're on the lesson 11, pearls before swine and bread to dogs. Among churchgoers, what would you guess is the most quoted Bible passage? Among Christians, what would you say? What do we like? What kind of verses do we like?
John 3:16.
Yeah,
John 3:16, right? Yeah, right in the end zone. John 3:16, right? Right next to signs for Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or whatever you have. John 3:16, right behind the goalpost. What else?
The don't judge passage.
Yeah. That's the answer to the next question. What passage do you think is known and often quoted by those who know little about the Bible? Right, Matthew. Is it Matthew 7? Yeah. Do not judge. Why do you think it's so often quoted? Why do people like that? Don't judge.
I think it's an easy out for their behavior. You can't judge me. Let God judge me instead. They can't.
Yeah.
No accountability kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a smokescreen.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, does that mean the verse is illegitimate and we should never apply it and we should always judge? Okay, that's not what it means. Let's jump into what it does mean. Studying God's Word, it says Jesus talks about judgment a lot. He says that he'll judge the world. He says that believers will have a role in judging the world, even in judging angels. That's 1 Corinthians 6, 2 and 3. Yet Jesus clearly tells us not to judge in Matthew chapter 7. So what does he mean? What role does judgment have in the thoughts and life of a believer? So read Matthew 7, 1 to 5. Volunteer for that. And then also if you find the page, if you shout that out, Matthew 7.
788.
788, awesome. And a volunteer to read 7, 1 to 5. actually go all the way 1 to 6. Bruce.
Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred, do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces.
It's an interesting editorial decision. Would you, if you have those little headings, would you put it before verse 6 or after verse 6? They went after verse 6, and I think I'd agree. But yeah, so does that little do not give to dogs what is sacred, does that go with do not judge, or does that go after that? There's not really a right or wrong answer. I would lean towards putting it with the do not judge. We'll talk about that a little bit. Let's just go through those questions real quick. How does Jesus very seriously communicate to us that we shouldn't judge others?
He says it's going to come around to you also. So.
Yeah, right? And he just says it, do not judge, right? He doesn't give us kind of this whole hierarchy and flow chart of, well, if they... verses 3 to 5 add a little more clarity for us. What kind of judgment is Jesus warning us about?
Condemnation.
Yeah, kind of a condemnation. How else might you characterize this kind of judging?
Condescension, or sanctimonious.
Yeah, right. Kind of a holier than thou. How else might you describe it? Hypocritical, maybe?
Yeah.
You've probably felt it before, right? We all have. Someone is just kind of making sport out of it, and is your concern really for my soul, or is this kind of a one-up kind of move that you're doing right now? Read Matthew 7, 5, and 6. How can you be so sure that Jesus does want you to do some judging?
Well, he tells you to first make sure you don't
Yeah.
have any issues like that, and then you can correct somebody, not condemn them, but
Right.
Now look at yourself first
bring them to
before you
truth.
open your mouth.
Sure, right. And what's the function in looking at ourselves first? I might suggest that it's in order to give us some humility. It's not to say, so long as I'm not 100% perfect, I can never form a negative opinion about anything else in my life. The instance I'll use all the time is there's a school shooter. You have to make a judgment, right? You have to form an opinion about what's going on. You can't say, well, maybe I just don't have all the facts, and just shrug your shoulders forever, right? Eventually we have to make a decision, but as we look at ourselves, we say, who am I, right? We also say, let me do this with not just a pinch, but a handful of humility.
Yeah.
And then also 6, right? Do not give dogs what it's. So yeah, you have to be judicious. You have to be discerning in what you're gonna give people, right? Do not give to dogs what is sacred. He's asking you to figure out what kind of situation you're in, right? There's judgment involved here. Agree or disagree, and why the judging that Jesus calls us to do shows no love or respect for people? Is the judging that Jesus calls us to do? What would you say?
Because you really don't know what's going on inside of anybody. You don't know
Sure.
their personal issues. You don't know why.
Sure. What else? What else might you add? Bruce?
I disagree. I think it's all about motivation. I think we're called to correct one another out of love, but that's what it's got to be. It's got to be out of love. It's all about motivation.
Sure.
If you're just trying to talk down to somebody or criticize somebody because you think that's pretty fun or whatever the weird,
Yeah.
your perverse, satisfaction you're getting out of it would be, if it's not
Yeah.
coming from love, it's not right.
Yeah, it kind of works as a self-justification thing. If I knock everybody else down a peg, I'm a little bit. It's the what do they call that? The tall poppy syndrome, right? You don't want anyone tall, so you cut everybody down. Yeah. What else? Is it the judging that Jesus calls us to do shows no love or respect for people? Agree or disagree?
Well, I'd say it definitely shows love and respect for people. The type of judgment that
Yeah.
he's asking, because you're trying to bring them out of error, out of a sinful, incorrect way to live, And you don't do that by condemning them, you do them by trying to lift them up.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go through, and I think I talked about it last week, but we're just about out of time, so maybe I'll just go through this. Maybe just a way that you might have this conversation. We talked about OTFN, observations, thoughts, feelings, needs. So let's say that someone comes into church this morning, they reek of Bush Light, and they're slurring their words and stumbling all over and making passes at people. How do I handle that as a pastor? Maybe first, observations. Hey, I see that your breath smells and you look like you're a little bit inebriated. Thoughts. Makes me think that maybe there's something going on in your life. Makes me feel sad, and we need to talk about this, and we need to stop this, right? We need to figure something out. So that's maybe one way of, we can avoid kind of hypocritical, unkind, mean-spirited judging, and yet also be loving and respectful to people, right? There are times where we need to say someone takes your wallet, right? Is it judging to say, hey, come back here? Okay, not right. So let's close with a prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank you for giving us your word, even the hard parts, that we might learn from it, that we might think about it on a deeper level and apply it to our hearts more profoundly. We pray that through your Spirit, you would increase our faith this morning and always. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Yeah.
So
So how long has air conditioning been on?
So we have